Hello, bookworms. Today I'm going to be talking about my most and least favorite Brandon Sanderson books. I read my first Sanderson book pretty recently and I loved it so much that I went on a binge and read most of his other novels. And since all of these are so fresh in my mind, I decided to talk about each shortly. Mind you, don't think that the books which are a lower rank on this list are bad per se. All of them are still pretty good, just not some are not as good as the others. There was only one that I actually didn't like that much, and I'll talk about it soon. A few books I've lumped together if they're part of a series, and some I ranked as separate books for reasons I will explain when we come to them. So, without further ado, here's my list of my most and least favorite Brandon Sanderson books in ascending order. First up, Steelheart. This is the only one of the Sanderson books that I have read that I didn't care for that much. Part of it might be that it's a teen or tween book or YA book. Part of it has to do with the main character and his relationship with his love interest, and the largest part is that I feel that it had a very cool premise. Some people get incredible powers and they run amok, the world is almost completely destroyed, and superpowered people rule with an iron fist, and a group of rebels work against them and try to kill a lot of them. It's kind of similar to The Boys if you watch the TV show or read the comic book on Amazon Prime. Uh, Not the comic book, but the TV show was on Amazon Prime. The story had a great start, but I feel it kind of wasted away as the story progressed. I lost interest. I can't quite explain it, but I wasn't feeling it. I'm still not going to hate on this book. It's still a pretty good book, but I guess I'm not the target demographic for it. It has younger readers in mind, so probably younger readers might still like it. Next up, number 7, The Alloy of Law, and that's from the Wax and Wayne series. The Alloy of Law is not a bad book, even though I ranked it pretty low. It has an interesting world. It's kind of a bit of steampunk feel combined with cowboys coming from the wilds to the big city to fight crime. Even though it's kind of considered to be part of the Mistborn series, I consider it to be separate from it, as it's set centuries apart, centuries in the future from the original trilogy, and the characters are different. It's also a different type of story than I expected reading from the previous Mistborn novels, so maybe that's why I ranked it a little bit lower. But basically, it's kind of a Western buddy cop mystery story, and it's much more lighthearted than the previous entries in the Mistborn series, although I do expect the other two books of the Wax and Wayne series to ramp up the stakes, judging by the end of the first book it gets a little serious at the end. I haven't read the other two books yet, but they're definitely on my list and I'm going to be reading them in the future. Next up, number 6, we have Skyward, another great sci-fi military novel that I would describe as a cross between Harry Potter and Starship Troopers, or somewhere along those lines. It's about a young girl, the daughter of a disgraced fighter pilot who wished to become a fighter pilot herself. Her father died in an alien attack when she was very little, but he was considered a coward for abandoning his squad and was shot down as a deserter. Because of this, she and her family are shunned and she's banned from pilot training, but that doesn't stop her from trying, so she still tries to become a fighter pilot. The only reason I rank this book a little lower is because it's kind of like a YA novel similar to Steelheart, and it's geared toward a younger readership. But unlike Steelheart, I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I loved reading it throughout. It wasn't really necessarily written for my age group in mind, but I think adults can still enjoy this one. Next, we have Warbreaker. Warbreaker is a standalone novel for now. It has a unique fantasy world which is not unusual for Sanderson. The magic in this world is fueled by people's souls in combination with color, and it sounds a little bit convoluted and weird when I explain it like this, but it makes sense in the story. The story follows two sisters, Princess Ciri, which is written in with an S, so it's definitely not Ciri from The Witcher, even though that choice is a little bit weird for me. Why would you name a character Ciri in a fantasy book? And we have another sister, Vivenna, and those two sisters are thrust into a world of living gods and magic, and they have to travel to a rival kingdom in order to save their own kingdom, and each has to do it in their own way. It also follows one of the gods in this book, Lightsong, and he struggles with his own lack of belief in his divinity, and he has some other personal issues. I was not sure whether to rank this number 4 or 5 since I enjoyed reading it so much, but I would still not recommend it to be the first Sanderson book you read. Maybe third, fourth, or something like that. Next up, we have number 4, Oathbringer, and this book is book 3 in the Stormlight Archive saga. I did enjoy this one quite a lot, but there was a part in the middle which kind of dragged on a bit too much, and not a lot of significant plot progression or character development in that part of the book, so it felt kind of like filler. So that's why I put this one, I separated this part of the Stormlight series and put it a little bit lower than the other ones. And I'll talk more about the rest of the series when I come to the 2 other books. Next, we have Mistborn, books 1, 2, and 3. The Mistborn series, which I will gather up all into one slot. The Mistborn series is an imaginative, bleak, dark, and intricately constructed world that also ties into the plot of the story very seamlessly and masterfully. I really enjoyed that part. That kind of connection with the world and the story are interconnected very, very well. I lumped all these 3 books in the series together, as you really need to read all 3 to appreciate the whole story. I'm going to give a short introduction of the first novel, The Final Empire, and the rest you can read for yourselves, of course. So the world of the story is set in a dark place. It's always covered with volcanic ash where crops barely grow, and they only do so if the fields are constantly tended to and cleared of the ash by a lot of effort. So the world is united in a single empire ruled by an immortal and invulnerable Lord Ruler, and his society is divided into the nobility, who live, of course, luxurious lives, but they are still subject to the Lord Ruler since he is like very, very extremely powerful. And we have also the Ska, which are basically slaves, and they don't have any freedom of their own. Many of the nobility have special magical or elemental powers, as they are referred to in the book, and they all have different traits. For example, increased strength, ability to influence people's minds, ability to control metal, and things like that. Most have only one of these powers, and only a very small minority of people have all the powers together, and those people are called Mistborn, and hence the name of the novel, Mistborn. And the story starts when one of the Ska, the slave class, named Kelsier, actually turns out to be a Mistborn, and he gains all the powers, all the elemental powers, so he decides to lead a rebellion against the all-powerful Lord Ruler in order to free the Ska, and his ultimate goal is to kill the Lord Ruler himself. He recruits the help of other gifted individuals among the Ska, and it turns out not all the Ska are lacking elemental powers, so some of them also have, special powers, and including a young girl named Vin, who is very important in the story, and who also turns out to be a Mistborn herself, and they all gather together to try to achieve this goal. So it's kind of a story of almost like a heist or rebellion story. Number 2, Elantris. Elantris, I think, is a great place to start reading Sanderson, as it's basically a standalone novel and it's not a part of a series yet. It's actually his first published book, but it definitely doesn't show, or didn't show for me when I read it. The world building magic system is pretty cool, imaginative as usual with Sanderson, and the story follows a prince named Riordan and a princess named Serene, and they are arranged to be married, so to strengthen the alliance of the 2 kingdoms they represent, because those 2 kingdoms are in peril of being conquered by a very powerful nation to the east. The problem is that the prince Riordan, on the morning of his wedding, is basically struck by a really strange disease, basically magical disease that turns him into a kind of a living corpse. And because he has this disease, all of the people who have this disease are exiled to the city Elantris, and the Elantris is the city of the fallen gods, where all the diseased people are sent to. They basically waste away there until they go insane, but Prince Riordan has some different plans for the city. And his betrothed, Serene, arrives basically never to meet her husband. She arrives on the day that the prince was struck by the disease, and they never meet each other, and she has to navigate the complex political landscape of this very unstable kingdom where that is threatened by a invader. Third main character is Bjorn Hrathen, I never knew how to pronounce that name, who is a priest from the invading nation that I mentioned, and he is sent to convert the king and the nobility and the ruling elite into their religion, so he could avoid a war of conquest. That's it about Elantris. I'm not gonna talk too much more about it. It's a really, really great book. Maybe I didn't make it out to be, and there's also some magical creatures and a magic system that not the most unique when it comes to Sanderson, but still pretty interesting. Finally, number one, we have the Stormlight Archives first two books, Way of Kings and Words of Radiance. So as I mentioned in another video, the Way of King introduces a really complex deep world and a thoughtfully developed magical system in an alien world with very weird creatures and plants that are not typical of a generic fantasy setting we usually get. So the world is plagued by storms that happen at very regular intervals, and those storms are so intense that no one can survive them if they are caught outside, so they have to hide every time a storm comes. And accordingly, the plants and the animals in this world are not very lush or green like our world. It's very rocky and covered in some sludge brought by the storms. And animals have also developed very thick carapaces. Many of them are various crustacean-like creatures or like armored creatures that are we have wild creatures like that, or even domesticated crustaceans used as pack animals, so which is pretty kind of interesting. And of course we have some magical creatures as well that I'm not gonna talk about too much because it's difficult to describe. It would take too long to describe the whole story here, but I'm gonna give a short introduction. So in short, one of the kingdoms in this world has their king assassinated by a strange race of humanoid, also weird type of creature that have started a process of signing a peace treaty with this kingdom, but they assassinate the king, or they send an assassin to kill the king, and the creatures live in a place that's called the Shattered Plains, which is full of rocky plateaus and chasms, and it's very difficult or almost impossible to conquer this kingdom. The new king, the son of the previous king that was assassinated, tries to wage a war against the Shattered Plains and against these weird creatures to avenge his father. And the story follows three main characters. First we have Kaladin. He's a simple soldier who was betrayed by his commander and he was sold to slavery, so he has to serve on a bridge carrying the crew in a war across these Shattered Plains. They have to cross chasms and conquer them one by one, so they need portable bridges, and slaves carry those bridges. And we have Shalon. She's a noblewoman whose family has fallen on hard times, so she tries to get near the fallen king's daughter, who is a great scholar, and steal a magical ring, basically, that can save her family from ruin. It's more complicated than that, but I'm making it very simple. And of course we have Dalinar Kholin. He is the brother of the fallen king, and he tries to bring the war to a close, but also to bring the new king, his nephew, on the right path and save the kingdom. So he has to navigate the plots and intrigues of the court, as well as lead his men into battle. Oh yeah, and most of the nobles have magical swords that can cut through anything, and they have kind of like mech suits of armor powered by stormlight crystals, and these are recharged during every storm, so the storms are the source of magical power in this world. The story is way more complicated than I just described. It's a very simplistic overview, but I think it might be a good introduction. That's it about my list of Sanderson books. As you can see, most of them at least have an interesting premise and world building, and in most cases very more intricate than I explained. The writing is always easy to read and flows naturally, and most characters are not cliche or one-dimensional. If this is something that interests you, check out some of these books. I would recommend to start with either Elantris or the Mistborn series if you are interested in any of these books, or if something else catches your attention, you can also check it out. Anyway, that will be it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. If you hated this video or you can't stand the sound of my voice, make sure to hit the dislike button and leave a comment about just how much I suck. Have a nice day, bookworms. See ya!